world becoming a global village, you find that those works which are still, which were written in local languages, they are there, but it's only that it's not being translated into into different language so that it can be spread all over the world.
You see, the Poetry Society in Zimbabwe, before even during the time of Ian Smith, was publishing people like Zimunya, Sayasaya, Mongoshi. You know, a lot of the African poets were speaking through. There was a society, a conscious society of people who were, you know, really against the Smith regime. And there was a lot told. There are many texts, and there are many historical texts. Terence Ranger, Professor Terence Ranger, for example, you know, has written extensively on the post-colonial history and so on in Zimbabwe. There is a lot. But the point is that people do want to look to the future. They do want, and young people don't want to to be fed the same stories, the same grassroots stories of the heroes of the liberation struggle. They want a future, and they want to look forwards.
Thank you. Can I also just jump in there and say, firstly, thank you very much for asking that question, because, you know, clearly it's one that helps us to tie in loose ends, as you said earlier on. What I would actually say, and of course I can, you know, I know what other poets write about, and of course I also know what I write about. Being it an evening of maybe 30 minutes performance, you may not get the full story of you know, the subjects that someone actually writes about. Speaking of my work, actually, I would like to think I do write. If I refer you back to the poem, you know, it may not come across as if someone is speaking about that. But then, if you look at, if you listen to Black, White, Brown, Mix, so what? While the poem does not necessarily, it comes from a positive angle, and it's tying all those eras from slavery to, you know, to the era that you speak about, you know, Ian Smith, to all those, you know, all those dark moments where I speak about, you know, history. History is there, we acknowledge it, but just like the seasons, it transitions with time. So it's not discarded, but it just transitions with time. And so I think it's important for a people, especially for, I would say, you know, for Zimbabweans at this moment, to realize that we have to come from a positive place rather than from a negative place. Because even if we are visiting that history, and if we visit it with bitterness or visit it from a negative angle, then all we are going to get is more violence, or we are going to get is suspicion. Or at the moment, you know, when I look at the situation in my country, it breaks my heart in the sense that it's not just black and white where there's divisions. It's Ndebele and Shona. It's tribal. It's in the village. Now it's Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe who did not leave the country. Sorry.
This is private. No, come on in.
Okay. So you see, there are many lines of division division in the society that we're trying to tackle. One of them is not just, like I said, black and white, Ndebele, Shona, which are tribes, but now there's another line that's slowly emerging, which is people who left the country, the so-called diaspora, and people who stayed in the country. There's a lot of suspicion and bitterness. People who are in the country think those who left, like myself. And by the way, I left before the politics got to what it is now. You know, 98, I came to England. So they think perhaps we're not as passionate as they are about Zimbabwe, or perhaps we don't care. We're not with them in this struggle. But that's not the point. The point is, if we all come from a positive angle and then realize that our divisions are what will keep us apart. What will keep us together is accepting diversity in our community, but then working together. So I don't care if you're white, I don't care if you're black, I don't care if you're living in another country. Like you said, we live in a global village. So let's look at our history and then look where we are going in future. So I think, you know, this era is not discarded at all, but we should appreciate perhaps that, you know, people are beginning to realize, especially the younger generation, that we have to come approach it from a positive angle. This is just my view.
I'd just like to add something to what's been said. I think also history.
Can we try and tie it to the
yes, I am. I'm
spoken word?
Yeah. I think artists tend to go back in history as metaphors or similar situations that may have a modern context. So if you look at Verdi's opera, at the time the Italians were trying to liberate themselves, many of his operas were about liberation struggles in their countries. That's a fairly obvious example. Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible to make points about human nature, 4 or 5 centuries after. So people will be going back to the Holocaust or to Zimbabwe or the apartheid in a similar way. So I think these things are never forgotten. But I mean, the dynamics. I mean, what happened in South Africa is an enormous tragedy in terms of the disinvestment and the lack of education for the non-white community, which is a legacy that is still suffered now with the violence and everything else. But what happened in South Africa was also fantastic. It was in relative terms a velvet revolution, although that's not to diminish the sacrifices made by so many people. But that country somehow turned around from an extreme situation to looking together to the future, and people like Mandela and others tried very hard to pull things together. So it's inevitable for a certain phase that some of the past is forgotten, and that was the principle of the reconciliation discussion. So I think these things come in waves, and the artists never forget.
And sometimes governments have a policy of instilling amnesia in the population in order to move on, because memory can be dangerous. If one, as you were talking, as you were saying, if one's always recalling division and
but that's precisely what I'm saying. I'm not saying that.
Governments try and repress it, but in the end it will emerge.
But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the criticism leveled, for example, by writers, is at the current government in South Africa, is at the current government in Zimbabwe. Fair enough, they deserve criticism. All governments deserve criticism. They cause crap, then they must get the crap. But the point I'm trying to make is that the constant reflection upon what is to be criticized now, what is oppressed now, the constant reflection upon the suppression of writers now ignores the fact that writers were suppressed before, that South Africa had a mile-long censorship list which together with which censored Black beauty, for God's sake, censored Marx, censored Engels, censored so much. You were virtually wiped out if you were a writer of any note in South Africa. And in the old Zimbabwe, in Rhodesia, you were virtually wiped out as a writer. You couldn't just openly criticize the Smith regime. So why is it only the current regime which is lambasted? Why is it only the current South African regime which is lambasted by writers? Yes, they should be, but not only them. Their predecessors should also come in for a bit of the crap. That is what I'm saying.
Okay. Any more about poetry from Afghanistan? We had free verse, didn't we? In Pashto, you write in free verse, and you write in traditional poetic forms.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hold this West Africa.
Well, I didn't, because I'm Persian, I speak Persian, but I didn't get you were speaking in a different language. Was it Pashto? Because it was Pashto.
Yes,
So it was in a different language because I couldn't get it. Because
you don't know Pashto, so
yeah.
you shouldn't be getting.
No, because the lady is explaining that you were reading in 2 different languages, but I think
No, 2 different forms. So
Monsieur Ghazal,
Ghazali classic as Hafiz said. Also the rhyming, the rhyming.
But everything was in Pashto.
Everything was in
But there were
Pashto.
different forms of poetry within Pashto.
Dari is similar to Farsi.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there
I was
is
feeling a bit disappointed that I don't understand.
It's a dialect of Persian.
Yeah, that's right.
There is not independent language,
Yes.
but it's
Okay, so now, as you're all very silent and plenty to mull over perhaps, I want to thank Hansen, where is he? Hansen Shiku. Pardon? Hansen Shikowole, Zabi Hassan, Arsalan Isa, Jumi Senda, and Mojawer Ahmadiyya, and the music by Farhad, which was great. So thank you very much.